or grow it. From the Stash Podcast.
What's up, everybody? Before we get into the episode, I'd like to announce that we have t-shirts and other merch located on our website. We have the classic premium t-shirt with the From the Stash logo, definitely a popular choice. Then we also have a limited drop, 2 designs made specifically for our Las Vegas trip this month. Visit fromthestash.com/merch or click the link in the YouTube description section below. Thanks to AC Infinity for sponsoring this episode. They have the best grow tent kits on the market today. You get their ion board LED grow light, their grow tent, their ventilation system, clip-on fan, and their controller 69 to control it all. You also get their fabric pots, a trellis net, plant ties, and trimmers. Definitely a good price for all that you get in the kit. I'll have a link in the description section below so you can learn more about these grow tent kits, and the discount code THESTASH15 works on both Amazon and their website, acinfinity.com.
Sometimes you have to do that, man. Sometimes you have to let shit go for the greater good of moving forward in progress, man. And it's like, we're dealing with that over with Franklin Fields now, trying to cut costs, cut expenses. And for the greater good, sometimes you need to. And it depends on if you're sacrificing quality for cost. You don't want to do that. But for us home growers, it's a little different. If you got to cut your costs because, let's say in the legacy market, PL, I've lit one, used to be able to supplement some of your expenses. Now it's not as easy because the market is totally different. It's very saturated and the costs are the same, but the, recouping is way different. It's way lower. Yeah. So at that point, how do you cut the costs? You've already put all that work and you already got your process in. How do you cut costs without losing quality? And I think that's a big, big factor a lot of us need to consider who do live in an area where the legacy market is tightening up,
Yeah, I think we kind of touched on it just a little bit when it comes to cutting costs. Genetics can be a big source of that cost. If you are looking at today's market, the average seed is going for about $10. And in my opinion, way too high. That's a different conversation. And if I wanted to cut costs, I'd quit doing that search. I would just grab myself a good solid genetic good bean, and I'd milk it. I would clone it. I got a bit of an echo there. I'd clone it over and over again, and then try to just get the best for my buck. Instead of spending $100 every few months on a fresh pack of genetics. So cutting costs, maybe take some clones. That would be a great way to start.
Yeah. Well, especially when you think about the cost of genetics nowadays. If you're not making your own clones, taking your own clones, you're either buying, the Bean Ridge, or you're buying clones. And both of those can be good depending on your ROI on that. But a lot of times that cost is just not realistic to incorporate into your overhead. So if you're buying all of your, like that's what I'm saying with P, he's lucky. He's done his process right where it works, but also I still think he should clone. But every next garden has a quota, so to speak. Well, not for him because he's very blessed because we got some good homies. But for most people, you have to buy the genetics for your next run. So immediately that's a factor. You gotta put that in. So how do you draw that back? Well, you find something you like and you just take clones. If your cost is just the gel and the cloning process, that's a lot cheaper than going to buy another $150 pack or, $50 to $1,000 cut or clone.
Speaking of gel and cloning gel, you don't even need to use it, right? Cut back on cost. Don't even use it. It's not required. You could certainly get away with not using it. You can just do the snip, put it directly into the medium if you want. Now, of course, it's going to take a little bit longer to root if you're putting it directly into the medium, but it'll be fine. Or the aeroponic cloner is another way to go about it. You can just have water in there. You don't need to have a rooting hormone in there at all. So
or even some aloe.
It's another way to cut costs. Just don't even use a rooting hormone.
Yep. Yeah. Good point with the aloe. That's another one. Personally, as I also see here, I am 35TT also mentions over on Twitch, twitch.tv/FromTheStashPodcast, recording once every week on Thursdays. Mentions you can actually clone right into water. You don't need anything at all. You kind of said it with the
aeroponic cloner. Yeah, sterilization.
Just put it's definitely going to take longer. You're looking about 10 to 14 days with some kind of agent. Without an agent, you're adding in an additional week, 2 weeks on top of that. But nothing at all. I guess if time is money, though, that's a different conversation, right? Are you really cutting back on costs if it's taking more time? But that's where you need to ask yourself that question and wager it out. Go ahead if you want to talk.
I was going to say that's what we talked about before. Is this like initial cost or long-term cost? Does it make more sense to spend some money right now to shorten the amount of electricity you use for that time period or the amount of resources you use? Or does it make more sense to not spend that initial money? So then long term, like, fuck it, I'll pay at the end of the month. It's not so bad. Because in certain cases, again, it's like, do I go through a pack of seeds to figure out the right phenotype? It might have males or females. I'm not really sure. Or do I just get a guaranteed cut that I spend more money on, and time is money? I skip through that whole process and we're off to the races, you know? So then you think about cutting that cost. Is it long-term or short-term gain? Is it a marathon or is it a sprint, you know?
Yeah, sometimes you got to spend money in order to save money. So a good example, I think, is lighting, right? A lot of people going from HPS to LED. I mean, I think a majority of the folks in the chat right now or watching on YouTube will probably have switched over to LED at this point because you can just save a considerable amount of money. A good example is I used to run 600 watts in a 4x4 space, right? So 600 watts of HID lighting, started out with the MH, flipped over to HPS for flowering. But then I switched over to a full spectrum LED back in like 2015 or whatever, right? Now, back then, the efficiency wasn't there as much as it is now. It's gotten better and better in regards to efficiency. These days, instead of putting about 600 watts, which I was doing with HID light in a 4x4, I can run 400 watts of LED lights. So I'm saving 200 watts. I actually have a small calculator up right now, which I use to kind of calculate the cost savings of my grow. And I just punched in 600 watts versus 100 versus 400 watts. And if you're running the lights at 24 hours a day, and your cost per kilowatt is about 12 cents, that's where it is in my area. That'll change from state to state or country you're in. So you need to find out what your kilowatt per hour is. Then you can do the calculation to find out exactly how much you're spending on electricity consumption. So the 600 watts to 400 watts example, you're literally saving, if you're running your lights for 24 hours, you're literally saving $17.28 every single month just off of running that reduced amount of wattage. So sure, you do have to spend that money to buy the fixture in the first place, but in the long run, running the amount less watts, you're going to make up for that cost, and you're going to be saving money in the long run. So that's definitely a way to cut costs.
I think that's right. The argument of like growing on a budget versus cutting costs. You don't have to be on a budget to cut costs. You're trying to be efficient and get your efficacy of your garden at a better point. And again, when you don't have the legacy market option, we'll say, to be able to go in and flip a little bit to get your electricity bill covered, well, then how do you dial that down? So if you've got 6 lights, let's say that's what I'm running, and then you multiply that with, at one point I had 1,000-watt LEDs, or not LEDs, 1,000-watt HPSs. So the thought process was, more watt, more output. I'm just going to get more. Well, then my cost is higher. Now, if I can't offset that by legacy marketing, we'll say, then, I got to get that cost down. So I went to 600 watters and then eventually 315 CMHs, but I was able to get more ceramic metal halide lights to be able to spread out my footprint better. So I offset some of the initial monthly cost, but then I had to spend more money initially to get to that point. It took me 6 months to a year to really see the effect financially of like, okay, that was worth it. As where you go buy a $1,000 fixture, you can get them cheaper, of course. But if, let's say, you go to get the top of the line with the best efficacy, you might have a little bit more time to see that result. You got it like when do you break even? 6 months, a year, 2 years. But again, long-term thinking versus short-term thinking. An immediate cutting your cost, buying something else won't be an immediate cut of your costs, so to speak. So something to take in consideration.
Yeah, definitely not capitalizing on first generation technology would be a great way to cut costs as well. I kind of laughed at people. 2015 was about the same time. No. 2015 is about the time where like LEDs were really starting to become a part of the conversation. They were in the realm or in the community before that, but you were spending thousands of dollars with the idea that you were going to recoup your money in a long period of time. Those the later end Blurple lights versus the earlier Blurple lights, in night and day versus the real effectiveness of those lights. If you had bought those lights, you were probably spending $2,000 to $5,000 to be conservative for a decent light. But you weren't getting that efficiency, so your product was suffering in the long run. And I remember laughing at LEDs at that point, using high intensity displays in and around the 2013, 14, 15. I was still using high intensity, so I thought there's no point to spend $2,000 to $5,000 on an LED if it's going to take me 10 years to pay that off and to get that recoup of funds. But in today's day and age, if you're looking to cut costs now, you're not looking at first generation LEDs. You're actually looking at some of the best LEDs, where even the bottom tier LEDs are your top tier LEDs. You know what I mean? The bottom tier LEDs just are light years above what 2005 to 2010 technology LEDs were at that time. So trying to keep up with current technology can be a real pain in the butt, and it can cost you more than anything else. So letting the market or the industry kind of play out a little bit is definitely going to be a bit of a benefit as well, trying to save some costs.
Yeah, the price of the fixtures have gone down so much. I mean, I used to spend $1,000, more than $1,000 to fill a 4x4 space with LED lighting, for example. Now, with a sale, like a Black Friday sale or something like that, you can get a good LED grow light to cover a 4x4 space for $500.
Mm-hmm.
So half the price. The prices have come down so much. So that's definitely a good thing. And then if you compare that to HID lighting hasn't really gone down in price, right? So now you're looking at filling a 4x4 space. What is HID lighting? Maybe $200 or something like that, roughly. So you're not as far off going to the 500 versus 1,000 or 1,200. So yeah, these days it's come down with pricing, and it definitely helps with cutting costs.
Well, it's funny. I look at that again, just like I do with flour, where it's like, did you guys just stumble on new technology that everybody can all of a sudden cut their cost or their price in half? Or is it, oh, we don't need 400% margins? Oh, okay. Yeah. And that's where, again, this conversation, you could either cut costs to have a better margin for yourself, depending on what space you're in, or for your own side. Because when you can go to a dispo nowadays and spend $75 and get a Z with some pretty good smoke, those who don't consume a lot have to consider, like, do I need to be pulling as much weight as I do and having this cost when I can't offset it again with legacy market, or should I just go and grab some elsewhere? I'm always the type to say just grow your own, but I smoke a fucking lot. So there's a big difference in my input and output, so to speak. So then you got to think about, do I cut back my cost to sacrifice another area? Because the lighting is going to help you. I think even if you're switching from HID to LED, that full spectrum is going to be massive. But then you think about cutting back nutrients. That's what I see. A lot of commercial grows will switch from a full line to something like Athena or Veg Bloom. Great, my kid on here. Or something that's not as full, in my opinion. A little bit more just your macros, less your micros. And so that can hinder your overall performance and quality. Maybe your yield will still be there, but then the quality is there. So like, is someone willing to sacrifice those areas a little bit to save a lot in another area? Because sometimes people have to consider that, versus when someone would say, well, just go organic. It's like, well, that sounds good. But again, that initial cost to go and buy all the stuff, do you have that in the budget? Because long term, it's going to save more, and that will give you a better result versus cutting back your synthetic nutrients, assuming you'll get better results. But you're going to have to spend more money. One is an immediate effect because you're like, well, shit, look at our cost per feeding is significantly lower. One is like, well, this year is going to be tough, but next year, next harvest, you know what I'm saying? It'll be totally different. Have you guys ever considered, or have you done, cut back on nutrients to try to either cut costs or to cut your overall input in terms of the nutrients? And did you see a difference, and was it worth it?
Go ahead, you first.
Okay. No. The thing is that if anything, I started to curate my operation around the plant. When I first started, I was using Miracle Grow, man. I was using lights that were not designed to be used in a garden. I was using cheap desk lights, for crying out loud. Now I started out of nowhere. I had no idea what I was doing. But, finding products that were actually curated around the plant was integral. I quit using Miracle Grow, started using a nutrient that was specifically curated for the production of the plant, and forgive me for beating around the bush there on the words. But it's like, same with lighting, use lights that are curated to grow. Quit using things like I'm a champion of CFLs. I am. They work, but it's like they're not designed to grow. The fixtures aren't designed to withstand moisture. That they're not created to be hooked up to other lights, and they're not power efficient and so on and so forth. They work, but they're not curated for growing the plant. So having a system that's curated for growing the plant was big for me. And part of that, when it included nutrients, was switching from Miracle Grow to, at the time, Green Planet.
Yeah, as far as switching from synthetic to organic in order to cut costs, yeah, I think it really comes down to cost per application, but more so cost per plant for a full grow cycle. So, for example, Build a Soil Craft Blend. A lot of people who have tuned into my channel are aware that I run Build a Soil Craft Blend. It's an organic blend that you top dress onto your medium, and then there is no bottled nutrients, right? It's just the organics being broken down by the microbes and being uptaken by the plant. Well, I'm looking online right now, buildasoil.com, at their craft blend. They've got a 25 pound food grade bucket for $100, and that's with the shipping. So what does that actually equal to per plant? So actually going down and doing the math on how much that's going to cost per plant, how far is that going to run, and then compare it to bottled nutrients. So what they say here is it's about a little over 8 ounces per cup, half pound. So it's like a half pound per cup. And now, how often are you applying that to your plant throughout the grow? Well, if you start with an organic soil like Fox Farm Motion Forest soil, for example, you're not going to need any nutrients for the first 30, 40 days, right? So a lot of people are starting out with a organic soil that's already blended up with nutrients. They're going to last you for 30 days. Then you're just top dressing 1 cup per plant at the 30-day mark. Then you're flipping the flower. Then you're doing it at the 30-day mark in flower. And then that's it. So you're only doing 2 cups per plant. So going out and figuring out, how many cups can you actually get, or how many plants can you actually grow with this 25-gallon bucket, and comparing it with the synthetic line that you might be considering running or are running right now. So actually comparing the costs per plant is definitely a way to go about it. You have to shop around, it can be time consuming for sure.
It totally can, but with enough homework, you could totally dial this in, whether it's organic or whether it's synthetic, because the measurements for everything are on the bottle. Everything is there. It breaks it down per gallon. You're going to know, are you going to feed your plant every feed, or are you going to feed every water? Sorry, I guess is a better way to put that. Are you going to do an alternating program where it's a feed, water? You can break that down. And, even though every plant is a little different, synthetic, I can almost drop my hat at the specific time I know when my plants are going to be watered. It's every other day. It's typical, unless I do something maybe a little heavier or something outside the ordinary. Every other day, 5-gallon pot with a plant every other day. So calculate that and figure it out. What's what? I'm using 11 milliliters per gallon. I've switched over to VPS. So you break that down. You're doing maybe 2 applications a week over the course of 8 weeks. That's 20 milligram a week times 8 is 160 milliliters per cycle. So then apply that to flour and you can figure it out. You're using a quart bottle, which is, I'm not sure what that comes into milliliters, but I'm sure it's a lot, probably 1,000 or so. I'm not sure. But yeah, and ask yourself, are you ready to go organic? Are you ready to go synthetic? But then there's more of a question to be asked in terms of how much are you going to do to accommodate those plants during their cycles? Are you going to have to react more with an organic than you will with a synthetic? And will those reactions cost more money? I guess would be my only question. If something was to happen or steer in any direction, is it going to cost more for, say, a bag of microbes to fix a singular issue? Or can you find the issue within your synthetic? I don't know. I guess that would be something to ask. I don't grow organic.
You also got to take in consideration too, like with the variables that come into play, because there is so many motherfucking variables, in the fact that every cultivar is going to react a little different. So some can get away with being fed more. Some are going to require, or are less. Some are going to require more. So it's like, even in that factor, it's like, man, this plant doesn't yield as much. Stank, but I got to feed it even more. Like, son of a bitch, this is tough to consider. Do I want to keep this going? Because my cost per pound or my cost per gram is higher on this particular one than the rest of them. Plus, it takes 10 weeks or 12 weeks to finish. So the electricity on there, if you look at it from a micro perspective and then get macro, it's easier to see where you can cut costs without hurting your quality. Because it's like, well, clearly this plant stank, but it's taking me too long to grow. This one right here, obviously the yield is so-so, or certain things in that factor. But when you're dialing your nutrients in, I feel like microbes are a huge thing. Some people will say, I don't need it, or they'll go with just something like the Lucas method with general hydroponics, which is 3-part, very simple. Or some people use just parts of advanced nutrients, or even again in the organic side, just using like a Dr. Earth, but not everything. Because your plant will grow, it'll be green, it'll be sufficient. Not everybody needs to, well, they do, but not everybody realizes they need to get the dankest of the dank out of that cultivar. Because then you think, all right, well, again, do I add something in to make it better that could cost more money, like UVB, implementing that, buying that light to have into your garden? That can essentially make your quality better, but then it's like, well, your cost per plant may go up, but is it really when you're getting better quality and you're probably smoking less, potentially? So like there's a lot of factors that you look into, again, from the micro level of down to just consumption of like, well, I blow through this, but it's tasty, but I don't get super baked. Like prime example, Wink could probably agree, is the orangeade. Very tasty, very unique. Don't get that baked off of it. So you're going to blow through a bunch of that. So then you're like, well, that whole plant got smoked quick versus this shit rocks me, man. I have this fucking pound for a month to 3 months, really depends. So
there are so many variables. There's so many variables. I kind of wanted to go back to our equipment. I think it's important too to keep your equipment cleaned and well maintained. Just like a good car, man. If you don't get an oil change, if you're not cleaning your filters, the car is going to work harder to perform the same. And that's the same with your lights. That's the same with your filters, your inlines. If your carbon filter's just caked with shit, you need to clean that off because it is chugging to try to get that air filtration through your tent. It's going to be working harder. It's going to be sucking more energy to do the exact same job that it's always done, and probably even worse. Same thing with the diodes on your lights, man. Over time, they get caked with shit. You got to clean that stuff off. Get out of my head,
bro. We're in the same frequency. Some of my diodes were burned out for I don't know how long, because nobody gets really underneath and looks when you've been growing as long as I have. I don't know, but it's like, so I've been losing lights, you know what I'm saying, for who knows how long. So essentially the efficacy in my grow has hindered because not taking care of the equipment properly or not having it perform at its best. And the car analogy is perfect. You're
take a good look at the
if
light.
Your fuel filter is fucking shit.
That's it. Dim down your light, put on a good pair of glasses, guys, and take a look at your diodes. All your lights are going to dim to like 0. And if that's too much, just a little hack, do it through your phone. If you actually just record a video of your light over with your phone, you can actually look at your phone later and then see the individual diodes. So you can just take a good look to see if there's any burnt out. Now remember, this is something that we all suffer from. There's infrared diodes too, right? And those infrared diodes will not actually show. We can't see those with our eyes, and they do look burnt out. But every model should have an example online of which diodes are infrared. So you would actually be able to see an example of your light on the website of your provider. It'll tell you which ones are infrared, compare that with the ones that are out. And if they're not the ones, then they're burnt out.
Dude, it's funny you say that. I found out in post-production that my lights were out because I was getting B-roll with the camera, just, and I was like, oh, whoa, there's like a whole line out in that motherfucker. Line skis hit. So... Yeah, that's a great fucking tip. To not destroy your eyes. Use the phone, put it through their little scan through, make sure it's good, because you'd be surprised. Even the top of the top lights, and luckily good customer service helps. But my X3 Ultra from CLtv had multiple lights that were burned out, and then at a certain point it was not working properly. I got it 2 days later. Didn't even send them the light back yet, and I just reached out to regular customer support, not influencer, none of that shit. And it's like, boom. But that's where, again, that paying more money for the long term thing we talked about before. Well, if you decided to buy that cheap ass light that's a really bad warranty, in 2 years when that light goes out, that long-term expense, that long-term cost all of a sudden just went up versus that light you paid for that lasts 5 to 10 years, no problem. Well, again, efficacy of your garden, it's long-term. Not everything is just day and night and tomorrow the next day. It's months and months. And if you look at it per harvest for the year, you can literally, analyze your garden and be like, okay, well, this one didn't yield as good or this one didn't smoke as good. Why? Well, document it. Until you got your garden tight and right, document it. It's easy for content creators because we can literally see the shit because we're editing it. And I'm like, oh, fuck. That doesn't look the same. The headbanger looks off. As where when you're popping, like, well, I guess not if you're Pigeons 420. If you're popping new seeds every time, you got to learn what that plant, the characteristics that plant has. You got to learn what it wants. You got to learn how to treat it. And you can get your costs down just by treating that plant a little different. Potentially using a little less light. Potentially using a little less nutrients. some plants will thrive more in a larger pot, so you're going to need more medium, versus other ones can do decent. Like the root zone just kind of thrives in a little one. It seems to really be, again, so many variables when it comes to it, but it usually stems down to the genetics. I feel like is the key point. You can modify this, that, the other thing, but how that genetic reacts to those things is the biggest. I'm seeing, again, on the commercial level, just the nutrients being changed. Certain cultivars that I loved don't have the flavonoid that pops as much, just on changing one or two things. It's like, damn. But then you incorporate something like a polymer from, like Flava from VPS, and you can see more efficacy in your nutrient usage. So you could potentially use the same line of nutrients with less amount you're doing there, but that cultivar may not react to it. So you got to figure if that phenotype is good with it. Now, I think you boys are also using Flava as well. I'm excited, at least for Chris, because he's the only one right now who doesn't have old or new genetics, but I'd love to see how that's going to do. If you could even do a side-by-side. We're doing that right now with Franklin Field, so we'll actually do testing to see how these ones dealt versus these ones. But it's like on a home grow level, is paying more money for one product that much more worth it? So then your overall cost for your plant really is lower because you're getting more efficacy with the input. So do it, Chris.
Yeah. My mind is on just not spending money for nutrients at all. That's a way to cut costs. Is really you don't even need to buy organic fertilizer. You don't need to buy synthetic.
Dare you?
You can compost, right? A lot of people are composting your table scraps, greens that you may not have eaten, coffee grounds, banana peels. All that stuff can go into a compost bin. And there's multiple ways to compost. Bokashi composting, vermicomposting, which is what I do. And I'm just putting my scraps into there. The worms are breaking them down. And you can eventually get to the point where you're taking a scoop of compost, top dressing onto your plant, and your plant's surviving off of that. It's growing off of that. So that's kind of the regenerative gardening side of things, to where you don't spend money on inputs. So that is a way to cut costs. If you had mentioned that. Now
I'm totally ignorant. What was the first thing you said? It was kombucha? What was that first? You said it. I got stoned. It was Bokashi? Bokashi. That would be a good one. We need to get someone who does that to come on the show, and we should talk about that more. Same with KNF. There's a lot of these different, very unique processes that you can see the same results as someone spending thousands of dollars on nutrients. Very, very cost effectively. Yeah, I think it did say Bukkake. It was something you said. It was something. But the biggest difference is against sacrificing the quality and cost type of thing. In those situations, when instead of dropping your amount of nutrients or with the synthetic side, switching to the organic side, you can still maintain your quality versus I feel like it's easier to totally pivot versus it is to drop some away. It's hard, again, on a commercial scale. It's not as easy because of testing, but for a home grower, it's like, let's say the person who's using advanced nutrients or house and garden, should I just drop back to a couple of them, or should I use the entire line? You're going to get the best results from the entire line. So you're better off, in my opinion, to switch organic in that case. Because it's like, are you going to sacrifice your quality and overall yield by saving some money, or are you going to save some money and still get that by just switching and pivoting? Now, the initial cost for transition may be a little tougher for some people, but if they go that route you're talking, man, that's really a lot simpler. It's just scary for some people to be like, let me just change everything that I've been doing, and we'll try this, and I'll see in 3 to 6 months if it works.
Yeah, I think like a big conversation comes around to whether or not we are really buying things that we actually need in general. It's safe to say that when I first got in, or when we get into this, it's we start doing our homework and we see, Mr. Grow It or Pigeons 420 and Rob, they're growing one particular way, and we're thinking, I got to do that. That's the way that they're doing it, and they're succeeding. So I have to do it that way too. And if you were watching me grow, a few years back, it's like, if you tried to emulate that, it would have been tough. It would have been tough because, as I've described my own method, it's really just like bull riding. I hang on for 8 seconds and I hope to God I don't get whipped off. But it's there comes a time when it's like I feel like we just buy everything, but we don't need most of it. Like for myself, for example, it's like I wanted to go big right off the bat. Hadn't even grown anything before, but it's like I needed a 9x9 room. I needed a full line of nutrients. I needed the best grow pots. I needed the best medium, and I didn't know anything. And it turns out that I didn't need any of that. I needed smaller stuff. I needed less nutrients. I needed to do tents, not a big room. So I feel sometimes too our eyes get big. It's like the dessert table, where it's like we want it all, but as soon as we start eating it all, it's like, oh, okay, I was actually kind of full. I didn't need that much. And I think that's really how we attack our growing careers is like buy it all, buy it. I want it all, and we're trying to justify it to the wife, like, oh my god, I saw Pigeons buy this thing. It's like this gigantic upside down grow pot, like it's amazing. I need 3 of them, and it's like. I don't think
we almost have to clarify, and like I need to start doing that myself. Is like I recommend this product if you can afford it and need it, because most of us got these products for free when we're on YouTube or using these. You know what I'm saying? So it's easy to be like, I want to have what Pigeons has, or I want to have what Chris has, Rob has, or look at Mr. Canuck said. I want to get that whole. It's like a lot of us have been very blessed that we put out the content we do, and people want to promote themselves, so they'll give us some products. You can't always just jump on the shiny object syndrome and be like, oh, no.
You can even dial it back from there. It's like when people go into the grow store, it's like, there's nutrients that tell you need the bottle with the naked lady on it. You also need the bottle, like you need this meter that reads out things in 4 different languages, and then you need to grab like it's a syndrome of just really not understanding what you're getting into, and then it's a matter of pulling back rather than trying to figure out where it went wrong. I just, we spend so much when we don't need so much. You're growing something that could be a seed could be flicked out into the front yard, and the chances of it actually succeeding are quite high.
Yeah,
so
I've ran into them.
Over thought process.
Yeah, you can, cutting back costs, not buying unnecessary equipment that you don't need. A good example of that would be a lot of people don't need the portable air conditioners. They can use the central AC in the house. So I've done that in the past where I had a portable AC. It's so easy to be spending $20, $30 just on energy consumption every single month from running a portable air conditioner. Now with the window AC units, it's going to be a little bit more efficient, but the central AC in your home, at least for me, it's been a lot cheaper to cool, so not buying the unnecessary equipment on that avenue. Also, I know a lot of people want to go towards DWC, but if you're looking to cut costs, maybe you have a DWC system and you want it to be cheaper, it can be money, again, energy consumption on the pump, on the chiller. If you're running a chiller, that adds up. A lot of money can be spent running a chiller every single month, just keeping that water temperature under control. So switching grow styles completely from hydroponics, for example, to a soil or a cocoa or something like that could definitely be cheaper when it comes to energy consumption.
Yeah, that's a great point. Switching grow styles. Yeah, that's one that I'm in, where it's I'm the kind of grower where it's like this is what I've been doing the whole time. Why would I change? But it's my habits that have actually become the most inefficient and most it's what cost me the most. It's just my willingness to not change and to stick to a habit. So that's a really good point. Yeah, changing your grow style altogether might be daunting, but it might be, that switch from synthetic to organic. Is that what it is? Is that the conversation? Do you need 21 bottles to grow? That's another thing.
Yeah,
I'm synthetic. You took the answer right out of my head. You do. Do you need all 26 bottles to grow? I personally would say no. I don't believe so at all, because a lot of those bottles have like an overlapping, and that's why it's like, when you go with another line of bottles and there's only 6 bottles, it's like, wait a second, well, what are those other 23 bottles? Oh, I need them because they have dancing ladies on them, right? Got it.
It's the secret sauce.
It's a secret sauce.
But this is where like the scaling back in that term. What about your plants? So again, legacy market tightening up, at least here in Michigan. Those who are out here trapping, doing their thing, little young Pablos, not the same as it used to be. So in this case, it's like, what do you do? Do you keep growing that many plants because you don't have the clientele? Or do you just grow for yourself? You draw it back. Because again, if your month-to-month cost is this, but then your month-to-month, what you get back, your ROI is shit at that point, well, then maybe it's worth just having a couple big, beautiful plants that you take a lot of care of they yield you enough to take care of you and yours, and you say, hey guys, go to the dispo because I'm not matching that price. Because that's really where it boils down to your overall costs. If you were able to offset that cost at one point, then that's where your margins change because you can offset it. Now that's not such an option in some areas. So it's like, well, then maybe you downscale. Maybe you go from that big space like P had down to the tents. Maybe you go from the 3-4 rooms that you thought you're going to grow because you can get rid of more down to just a few, because it's like, damn, well, the market's not the same. Yeah, I've got all this smoke. Yeah, it costs me less, but if I'm not getting rid of it, it costs me all this. You know what I'm saying? It's still, $5,000 versus 500.
Growing one plant is cheaper than growing 2 plants. I don't care how you put it, how you frame it. You can make big single plants, that could fill out a tent, right? And then you're using half the amount of nutrients, right? There's so many variables, but man, when it comes to being cost effective, you really got to weigh the options. I think it's important that you talk it out with whoever you're with, whether you got a roommate, brother, sister, husband, wife. Don't do it. Don't husband, way, whatever you swings your direction. The thing is that don't do it in a household where you don't have the consensus of everybody, because let me tell you, one of the worst things to have happen is you get a plant through 9, 10, 12 weeks of cycling, and then your enraged spouse rips them all out of the pots and throws them in the trash because you were growing and they didn't want you to, and it was horrible. Yeah, so what I would suggest is make sure that you weigh these conversations out with the people that you're living with, the people you're going to be growing with, see how much money is available, weigh your budget, what options are available to you. Are you going to have things shipped to you? Because that's another thing you got to ask yourself. Are you able to get it locally, or are you going to have it shipped? Because locally it's probably going to be slightly more expensive. However, there's things that are going around there. You're supporting your local community, so on and so forth. But you gotta weigh these kind of things and see, what fits your style, what fits your style of grow, what are you willing to compromise on, and how do you move forward like that? But being cost effective is a big part of the conversation.
And that's one more I want to add in.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say labor too. You got to think about your time. Just what that was.
You read my mind, man.
Dude, everybody's fucking tripod, bro.
Money. I mean, if you're going into the garden with a standard work checklist, for example, of things that you need to do, you can save the amount of time that you spend in your garden and focus your time on other things, right? Working a job, for example.
Yeah, no, that's super, super important, because even just free time to chill. And that's where, like, I've been slacking on recording content because I've got no fucking time lately. I'm time poor. And it's like I have to set up my camera and record all this stuff. I just go in there and quickly knock it out, get it done. And I'm already sweaty, so I take the shirt off. I don't know. That's OnlyFans. I'm not going to put that on YouTube. So it's like I've been busy. So then you got to factor in your time. And if you were to look at your time as an hourly pay or as a salary, what would you pay yourself to do that kind of work? And I know it's hypothetical, but you got to look at everything like that. Time is money. Money's a byproduct. It's not the most important thing. It's not the goal, but you're sacrificing either freedom with family or yourself, or money by having an inefficient process, which is, again, fucking up your cost. So there's so many variables to it, man. It's crazy. There's layers to this shit, layers to it. And if you can check a few of them off, you can slowly optimize your process. By the end of your next harvest, you could be right there and get your whole exact cost-effective process to have the dankest bud for the best price.
Well said. Well said.
Any other
well
tips,
said, boys.
anything else like that? You're listening, or you're watching.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, drop it in the comment section, because there's a lot of things that other people have in terms of DIY stuff and things that, alternatives that aren't just, herb specific, that are for other things that work very well, that can save us all money. Because that's the goal. We got to tighten up, not use as much resources, time, or money, and get the best product possible.
Amen. That's a good point, guys. If you're watching this on Twitch, stick around, because we actually are going to do a little bit of a smoke session after the show. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you don't forget to go check us over on twitch.tv/FromTheStash where we record all these episodes live in front of a digital audience. Even our guests, they come in, we have a conversation, and then we do a little bit of a talk show afterwards, brought to you by Thick Ass Glass. If you want to come check it out, From the Stash Podcast over on twitch.tv. On behalf of myself, Rob, and Chris, peace out, YouTube.
Baby.
And wait, yeah!